are up to 21b. And yesterday we had a whole discussion about umbrellas on Shabbos, which we connected to. We saw a connection to our Gemara because our Gemara talked about the oihel, the tent that is moving. And Tosfos here brings down about a moving tent, oihel zaruk it's called, that it's there is an opinion that holds that that's not really a tent. And if that's so, there might be room, if that's not really a tent. So number one, it would be a question on our Gemara. How would the board, the door that was placed in order to be an oihel, to permit the children to ride on top of it, not get tummy, how would that door be useful? How would it help them? This is called an oihel zaruk. This is called a tent that's movable. It's not really a tent. And therefore, if something is impure underneath, it will actually penetrate straight through the door and go to the child that's on top and make him tummy, make him impure. So this is Tosfos' question over here, and Tosfos and Eruvin asked this question, and it's the question, and we took it a step further, that this would seem to also be possibly a leniency for carrying an umbrella on Shabbos, because an umbrella is an item that is moved. You use it while you're walking, and that would be called an oihel zaruk, which maybe is not called a tent, and that could be room for permissibility on Shabbos. And we did conclude that the minhag ha'olam, the custom, is not to use a umbrella on Shabbos. It's not Shabbosdik. It has some element of not being apropos for Shabbos. Even if you live in an area that has an eruv, so you're allowed to carry outside, but carrying an umbrella doesn't seem appropriate. And
Rabbi, a question on the.
Yeah.
I know every culture has its. I've heard this. I'm not 100% sure where what that the British, like a dressed up British man, part of his garb is an umbrella. In other words, it's a hashuv thing, not a weekday thing. So I'm curious if cultural things can come into play in this type of ruling.
Right. So I don't know if that's a contradiction to what we were saying. In other words, even if it's something that's used as an honorable type of thing, not necessarily does that mean that it's Shabbos. You know what I mean? It still could be not so apropos for Shabbos. Like, for example, even like a bicycle. Let's say there was bicycles that were like fancy, very Harley Davidson bicycles, or some type of a real, Lexus bicycles, So they made this fancy bicycle that in some country they go around with it, the chashav people. It's still not Shabbos, So an umbrella, the fact that you're walking with some item that's used, that it's like a machine. You're walking around with some type of a structure. It's still not appropriate maybe for Shabbos. So I don't know if that would be an exemption. I mean, it could theoretically be a reason if it was Shabbosdik to permit certain scenarios. Like, for example, if the umbrella is already opened. So I saw brought down that some of the commentaries want to say the problem with that is that it's maris ayin. And that takes us to Ezra really brought that up yesterday, that maybe it's maris ayin because people won't know how it was opened. So they'll think that maybe you opened it on Shabbos. Ezra mentioned that. And I said, I'm not 100% sure if Marasayan would apply because this is a rabbinic decree. So I looked it up. It actually is a big topic of discussion among the commentaries. Um, uh, does Maris Ayin apply to rabbinic prohibitions? And the conclusion seems to be that it does apply to rabbinic prohibitions, but only in public. If a person, and normally Maris Ayin applies even in private, but that's only when it's a biblical prohibition. When it's a rabbinic prohibition, then we don't necessarily say that it applies in private, the Maris Ayin. So in the case of the umbrella, where a person is using it to walk in the street, that's in public. And even though it's a rabbinic decree, it would still apply. So what Ezra mentioned seems to be correct, that would be problematic, even if your umbrella was opened before Shabbos. So you could maybe come up with some leniency that it's already an oihel, it's already a tent. I'm not making the tent; it's already a tent. That there, you could. It seems like some of the poskim seem to say, but it's still a problem because of Maris Ayin. So I saw that brought down, Ezra. So that's seems to be a correct rule. Now, if you were in your backyard and you wanted to, and you have an open umbrella, there could be a leniency there because there's no Maris Ayin in private on a rabbinic law, on a rabbinic prohibition. So if you're just in your backyard or something, and you wanted to open your umbrella, you had an open umbrella, and you wanted to walk around with it to look at your garden or something. I don't know. Seemingly, if it's private, it's a hidden area, people aren't going to see you. That
Can you answer it?
seemingly could be okay. Could be okay. But however, I did see, and I'm not sure. I have to look this up. But I did see there's a famous book called the Lamed Tes Malachos from Rabbi Ribiat. It's a 4-volume set. Some of you may have it. It's the gray gray book. But he brings down here that one may not hold an opened umbrella over his head to protect himself from rain or sun, because the umbrella material is designed with a frame to retain its shape and is therefore considered an oihel in all cases. So he doesn't say opening it is the problem. It's holding an opened umbrella. That's what the wording he uses. So I'm not exactly sure why that is. I have to look into this more. I'm just mentioning that it seems that there might be, in addition to Maris Ayin, even if the umbrella is opened, maybe there is a problem that the way he writes it, you can't hold it to protect yourself from rain or sun. And it has something to do with the fact that it's designed with a frame to retain its shape, and it's called an oihel in all cases. So I guess that would that would possibly mean that you can't use an umbrella even in private. Yes, Mordechai.
Yes, a number of years ago when I was attending a class regarding Hilchos Shabbos, and then something like with swords came up, I pointed out that I had seen a picture of a royal wedding in England, and the men were wearing swords. And so I pointed out that sometimes a sword can be a tachshit.
Interesting. Okay, well, Victor, you got someone on your team over here. Okay, yeah, maybe.
I think in some of the Middle Eastern countries, they used to escort the chief rabbi with swords, and the guards were Jewish. And I think even on Shabbat they would carry in some of these Middle Eastern countries.
Now, when you said that people would go around with umbrellas as a chashuv, as an honorable or dignified way, did you mean opened up, or did you mean rolled up and closed?
I think it was closed. It was almost like a British man's hat and his tie and his jacket and his umbrella. It was his shoes.
It was
Everything
like
was.
a cane. His umbrella was like a cane that he was using. It was
Yes,
almost like,
yes,
yeah. So,
almost.
uh-huh. So in that case, you can't really say that if it's opened umbrella is not Shabbos. You know what I mean? You can't compare the two to an opened umbrella. You know what I mean? That's not. But the question would be if an opened umbrella was a chashuv, was a dignified way of walking, then maybe you could question such a thing and say, well, maybe it is the derech on Shabbos to, or it could be it's an honorable thing for Shabbos. Then you could maybe question it. But the fact that when it's closed, it's honorable. I don't think it'll allow you to. I don't think there's any way to permit an opened umbrella. You know what I mean? From based on that, but in any event, definitely is not the tradition to have to use a opened umbrella.
Rabbi, question.
Shabbos. Yes.
Based on what you just read about the fact that it's a structure, so to speak. So wouldn't what I said before about the fact that if you do have the umbrella, that you are creating a structure if you were to open it on Shabbat, and that's the problem.
I'm not exactly sure what you're saying. That is the
You
opening
just-
of it and not the carrying of it. Is that what you're emphasizing? What? Just explain what is your what is the main point?
You just read from the I guess the gray book, whatever the
Yeah.
book. Okay.
Yeah, the Lamentas Malachis. Yeah.
Which
Okay.
volume?
Which volume? I read from volume 4.
Thank you. Again, I just wanted to run to get it. I can't, when I bend down, I can't start looking for it. Shkoyach.
It's volume 4, and what I read from, and again, I believe it deserves to be looked into what he means by this, but it's on page 1075, and he writes about you can't hold even an opened umbrella that's going to protect himself from rain or sun because it's designed to retain its shape and it's considered an oihel in all cases.
So basically, if you were to open it, you're creating a structure.
Right, but why, if it's opened already, is it a problem?
I mean,
It sounds like he said that
it's one thing.
the fact-
if you're opening on Shabbat is the reason why
Maybe
you can't open it is because you are creating a structure.
right, for sure. That's the reason. In other words, that's what that's what we were mentioning all along. That the opening an umbrella is considered a making an oil, making
No,
a
it
tent. The only
sounds like-
question was,
But
You mentioned you mentioned, Rabbi, that it's because the way it holds the material in a way, a taut way that the rain, I guess, drips off, whatever. It sounds like that alone is, forget about opening and closing it. It sounds like that alone, just holding it over yourself is an issue because the way it's the holding the material either by the metal or whatever mechanism they use is also an issue.
is a
Sounded like.
noyel. Right. So in other words, what it sounds like what we're adding from this book, this great book, the Lamentas Malachis book, is that not only is it a problem to open an umbrella from scratch, but even if it's open, but it's not on top of you, and then you move it to protect yourself. So at that point, you are then making an oihel, and it has something to do with the fact that it retains its shape, and it's considered an oihel, and you're putting it now on to protect you. So now you've made it an oihel. That's what it sounds. That's what it sounds like.
What page was that, Rebbe?
1075. And the bold is the number 2 there.
the other thing too is to support Victor. Okay, you have to understand the British Isles are also known for their rains. I mean, the environment. So if a British gentleman walked around with an umbrella, that he could use either as a cane or as an umbrella. This is part of his normal wear. Just like if when you're in the military, especially if you were in the Marines, U.S. Marines, all right, part of your formal uniform is a sword that you wear.
Right.
It's not something that, if you didn't wear it, or if you didn't have it on, you would not be in proper uniform.
Right, but still opening it up.
I'm not talking about. I'm talking about the sword. The sword.
The sword part. Yeah, yeah. Oh, the sword part, meaning Mordechai's case. Okay. Right. Okay. Yeah. That's a good point. Okay. Very good. So let me just summarize what we've just said over here, and that is that there are definitely issues with an umbrella. We thought of a leniency based on our Gemara. And the leniency was the fact that based on Tosfos in our Gemara, that a moving oihel is not an oihel, and if the umbrella is being moved and it's traveling, maybe that would be room to say, well, it's not a real tent, and therefore you're not transgressing anything. So if you want to rely on that leniency, on that, we said that it's definitely not accepted. And the problem with that would be, in other words, even if the umbrella was open before Shabbos, and for whatever reason you could get around this problem of you could say that it's not a real tent because it's moving and so on. But the thing is, it's not within the spirit of Shabbos to carry an umbrella. So that would be a problem with an umbrella. However, there are other poskim that there are other issues as well. And one of those issues would be that it could be a problem of Marasayan. And then the Marasayan problem, which means people see it and they're going to think that you opened it on Shabbos and that you're allowed to open it on Shabbos, that would be an additional issue. Now, the heter, the reason why there are poskim that would say it's okay is they hold that you're even allowed to open it on Shabbos. And if you would be allowed to open it on Shabbos, then the only issue that you're really going to have is that it's not in the spirit of Shabbos. But otherwise, if you're not allowed to open it on Shabbos and you're going to say, well, I opened it before Shabbos and so on, you still have the Marasayan problem as well. So you got a number of problems. And according to this book, Rabbi Rubiat's book, it seems that he holds that even if it's opened before, it's still a problem because now you're protecting yourself. And for some reason, the fact that it has a frame, it makes it more problematic. And to use, it's considered a noihel. So again, we have to understand it a little more. The laws of Shabbos are complicated, but something to look into. But that sort of connects this, the discussion of using our Gemara as a source to permit an umbrella on Shabbos. Yes, Jeffrey.
But the original question is still very interesting. We should take it up at another time, I think, that Victor asked. Does the cultural spirit of the times have an effect on what we consider to be appropriate on Shabbos or not? And I think it really does. I think we've changed completely since the time I grew up. Notice what kind of shoes people wear on Shabbos now, for example. It's completely different from what people used to wear that they would think was the only appropriate kind. Okay, and our clothing, I think, is always something that's subject to the norms in the society you live in. The rabbis used to say when I was growing up, what's appropriate to wear on Shabbos? What you would wear to a courtroom or something formal like that, they used to say. But it's not true anymore. And then you brought up the idea also of the scooter. If something is not Shabbosnik, that's in the category. What they used to say for sure was not in the spirit of Shabbos. So I think this is something we should talk about another time.
Right. Okay.
Very,
Sounds
good topic.
Yeah. I mean, are you implying like if everyone uses scooters, then it becomes within the spirit of Shabbos?
Yes, correct.
You're thinking that?
I'm
In other
thinking
words,
especially in Europe, where the Jewish communities may not be in the city or whatever, there may be fewer places to go, and that people ride bicycles. And now here it's becoming much more possible for people to ride bicycles. In our city, we have special lanes for bicycles. And this is going to become more and more a way of dealing with fuel and emissions and things like this. Already, I see many towns, many people have changed their whole opinion.
Well,
Now,
right now,
hasn't been used.
the teenagers have changed everybody's opinion. They're riding around. You see what's outside of a shul on Shabbos now? It's like 20 little scooters
Yeah,
that they ride on.
yeah. Those are teenagers. The ones I see are much younger than that.
but I would question if the fact that people do it, if people can decide what's the spirit of Shabbos, or does Shabbos decide what's the spirit of Shabbos? In other words, it's not based on what people want to make the spirit of Shabbos. It's what is within the spirit of Shabbos. So I don't believe that would play a role. I do believe that if something became very traditional in the king's court and king among the ministers, that maybe we could say, oh, that's a very then you might be able to discuss if that's called within the spirit of something honorable, because in this country that's considered very honorable, and if it fits with the laws of Shabbos and so on,
Right. Well,
maybe
that's
maybe, and even then, that's only a maybe.
For sure.
I have to think
For
of
sure.
I would have to think of a scenario where it would make sense.
it's
not so I'm not so comfortable.
I would think it's a two-part test. First is the absolute, the halacha.
Well, of course, we're not dealing.
Does it right? First, that's the first question. Does it comport with halacha? And then the next question is it Shabbosdik?
Right.
And I think that's more of a mushy neighborhood feeling kind of thing. So I don't think that has to be so absolute. What is, quote, Shabbosdik? Well, to a certain extent on the halakhic side, again, if it's not something you do every day or what, I don't know.
I think it's changing.
Right.
It's completely different from when I was growing up.
Yeah, everything's changing.
There you go.
Right. But again, I don't know if I think the logic that you're basing it on, I think you have to like step back and decide if that really would be a good. In other words, you're taking it, I think, maybe from the wrong end. In other words, we have to start with Shabbos. Is this considered honorable for Shabbos? Not based on what people want to decide. If people are doing it, so then it's Shabbos-dik. It's based on, is Shabbos say that it's Shabbos-dik? Is this country, is this something that's honorable in this, in this place? Then maybe you could talk about it, But again, I think it has to be started from the other direction. Okay, in any event, so we have
Rabbi, I have another question, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. We've had discussions about these different things, and so therefore we've uncovered some of the reasons why. So my question is, if you know the reason why the rabbis assert something, and you for sure know that you would stay away from that situation, could you still use it? So for example, the example of the bicycle.
I thought that's what Shlomo HaMelech thought. It's the same thing.
Yeah, we know the reason why the
I knew the
bicycle
reason.
were ushered, because they were afraid that people would fix something on Shabbat, and so in order not to do that, they basically gave a blanket isser saying you can't use a bicycle on Shabbat. But if you know that one of the reason is because they don't want you to fix something if something breaks, all right, would you then be allowed?
no, absolutely not. the question would be, if people don't fix bicycles, would that fall off? Would the whole problem fall off? If people never fix bicycles and basically you just throw it out if it ever breaks, if that became the tradition, that a bicycle was not fixable, let's say they made bicycles differently, and you can't fix a tire that goes flat, is unfixable, and therefore you just throw out the bike. They make disposable bicycles. So then you could start questioning, well, maybe the decree, then you could say maybe the decree was only on bicycles that are fixable. These bicycles are a different bicycle. Maybe then you could say that, but the fact that you know of it, that definitely does not give you a leniency. The leniency would be if you could say maybe that this is not what they were talking about. That would be maybe room for a leniency.
Because, for example, another situation would come, in the old days, you were not allowed to open up a can.
Mm-hmm.
Because the fear was that you would then use the can to store other things. And so therefore, you were told on Shabbat, you can't open a can, because of that situation. But now we have, for example,
no one uses it to store. No one uses cans to store anything.
Right. So they throw it away. So now people, I've had a situation where Rabbi Benjamin Lehrfield, Rabbi Lehrfield's son, came and gave an entire drasha on what on the fact that nowadays, because this is a throwaway society, people are not expecting you to store things, and so therefore you can open up the can because you're going to throw it away, and so it's not problematic.
Mm-hmm. Really, that's what he poskins. That's what he says.
Well, he gave an entire drasha as to all the different sides, and
Right.
they said nowadays, since people do not save things in order to store stuff in it, then there are poskim who basically say it's okay to open up a can and then throw it away after.
Right.
Ezra, I've seen people that make a hole in the bottom of the can, and then they'll open the top of the can, and that way it's useless.
Unusable as a keli.
Can't store anything. I've seen people do it that way. I don't know what the rabbinic.
Yeah, the laws of cans. It's definitely an interesting topic, and it's interesting that you bring that in. And he wasn't talking about like a soda can. He was talking about like a can of vegetables or things like that, or tuna. Was he talking about soda or everything? Anything?
Any can that I think that has things in it that you want to get,
right?
And you know for sure you're not going to save the can because you're just
right. So I would wonder, number one, if there's a difference between a can of vegetables and chickpeas or a can of soda. Because a can of soda can't last. It has to be thrown out because soda, even what's in it, is not usable afterwards because the bubbles, it gets flat. But a can of chickpeas or something.
Keli.
Many people.
That's not true.
The keli that you're making.
Is it a keli? If it's the fact that it's going to be thrown out.
The fact that the soda goes flat means nothing because you can refill it with grape juice.
No, but no one does that. So, and the fact that you have a little soda in it, it's going to automatically be flat soon. So it's for sure going to get thrown out. So is there room to say that you didn't make a keli? Now, I don't open soda cans on Shabbos. I'm just saying that I could see there to be a difference. Again, a lot of people now, today's day and age,
you open it and you crush it.
Well, yeah, I don't do that.
Everything nowadays has an expiration date, which basically means something goes bad after that.
Yeah, but a lot of people, they open a can of chickpeas and they don't eat the whole thing. They put it in the fridge. So I would say that a can of chickpeas, the can is maybe usable. And so therefore I would see if someone would say, well, if you make a hole in the bottom and on the top, and and so therefore it's not really a proper vessel, and then it would be it's definitely not, it's not something that you would save. So then
Why
maybe
do they
more
tear open
big a hole?
tissue boxes from the side?
So my question is, well, how big a hole are you going to put in? Because you can
Right.
say, okay, in order for you not to be able to store anything in there, I have to make the hole as big as the
chickpea
circumference of the can.
or the
Okay.
chickpeas, right? If the chickpeas will fall out.
No, I mean, if you're going to say you're going to use it to store something, then you have to make sure that you can't store anything in it in order to be able to, in order for it not to be used.
No,
So
I hear what you're saying, Ezra, but I would just say that let's say you want to use the claim that people don't use cans anymore, that they had for something else to store things, store other things in. I would still say that they might store these items in it, and they might use it for a later use, not like a soda where it's only for a one-time use. They might store the chickpeas that are in the can. Now, no one's using your chickpea can to go store some eggs that you made, and you need a thing to store it.
Old nails.
No, but
You use it for hardware. You throw nuts and bolts in it.
But
Doesn't
no
have
one
to be for
claims that a
food.
vessel has to be for posterity. The fact that it's used for future use is already a vessel. The only leniency about vessels is maybe if you want to say that it's going to be disposed, it's disposed now, it's a one-time use, that would be room for maybe some, for leniency. That's how people, that would be a reason, from at least from my understanding of leniency. Again, I wasn't there at the shear that Rabbi Learfield's mentioned this leniency. I remember when no one ever opened soda cans on Shabbos, and so I continue not to open soda cans on Shabbos. But about this leniency of opening other cans and things, I would question if it's 100% legit, unless you would make a hole that would make it not usable to even keep the items that are in it.
The next time he comes down, I'll ask him again.
Yeah, no, it sounds. Listen, I hear it. There's reason to say that that things should change if it's not usable as a vessel. Definitely is room to. I understand the logic behind like soda cans and things like that. But anyway, yeah. Listen, the halacha is. It's not the halacha changes. The practical side of things change, and all the time, and therefore you have to apply the halacha to the way it needs to be applied differently. Sometimes it has to be applied differently, but again, it doesn't mean because we know the reason then you could permit it. It means because that halacha doesn't apply here. You did not build a vessel. The point is that the reason why you're going to come up with a leniency here is not because, oh, I'm not going to fall into that trap that the rabbis were worried about. It's because this is not building a vessel. That would be the reason why it would be permitted, because this is not a vessel. It's called the disposable. It's something that can't be used as a vessel. It has a hole on both sides. Something that's liquid and you make a hole on the bottom and on the top, that's not usable for anything ever again. It's not a vessel. You didn't make a vessel, But anyway, that would be a topic of Hilchos Shabbos, which definitely deserves a lot of deserves to be looked into, exactly the cases and how to apply it.
With respect to what Victor said, you put a hole. Isn't putting a hole in the vessel on Shabbat something that's also problematic?
So you'd have to do it like at the same time, maybe if you did the top and the bottom, so you didn't make a vessel. And each time you make the hole, wherever you make it, you're sort of making a vessel, right? But if you make it on the top and on the bottom at the same time, maybe, I don't know exactly. But in any event, I don't know how easy that is to do.
The operation of putting the hole in the vessel.
Okay, anyway, yeah, we'll have to look into it. I'll have to see. I don't see him talking about opening cans, interestingly enough, in this Lamed Tes Malachos book. So I don't know. I have to. I'm sure online there must be a lot of talk about the opening of cans on Shabbos. Okay, getting back to our Gemara. So we were talking about the the making of the water that was used to sprinkle someone who's tamei. It's called mei chatos or mei nida. The water with that was mixed with the ashes of the red heifer, paraduma, and it was used to purify someone. How it was made, and they wanted to make sure that the water is not impure itself, and they had all this whole method, and they would go to they would take extreme measures in order to make sure that it's tahor, that it's pure. And we had the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that says that the children would sit on the backs of the oxen, and instead of using doors, which the other opinion says they would put doors on the back of the oxen and the children would sit on the doors, the Rabbi Yehuda says no, we would have the children sit specifically on the oxen themselves. And the conclusion of the Gemara was that Rabbi Yehuda, who normally says that a tent that is not created as a tent, is just naturally made as a tent, that's not called an oyel. So how would the body of the ox, how would that be considered a tent to block impurity from penetrating through the ox into the child that's above it? Wouldn't the child become tamei when he's on top of a natural oyel that wasn't built as an oyel, wasn't built as a tent, and therefore it shouldn't block it? And the Gemara answered that there's a difference if it's malei egroif or not. The size of that ox was a very large ox, and therefore there was the measure of a malei egroif, this fist size, which was a large fist, the size of the Rashi tells us it was the size of a head of an adult, and therefore it was considered a bigger measure. And it's, even though it wasn't made by man, it wasn't intended to be made as an oil, it will be considered an oil because of its size, and it doesn't fall into, you don't have all the rules of an oil, of a tent, and therefore the body of the ox will block impurity because it is an oil, because it's large.
Rabbi,
and so the understanding of Rabbi Yehuda. Yes, yeah, David.
yeah, you said before that an oil that's moving is not an oil. So if
Right.
this is on the back of an ox and the ox is walking, all of a sudden it's not an oil.
So this was a question that was asked in Tosfos, and he asked it on the doors, and he asked it on the oxen, and the explanation that is given is number one, this is not the movable, the fact that it's moving, that it's not considered an oihel, there is such a view. Doesn't mean everyone agrees with that. And Tosfos says it's possible that view holds that they didn't use the doors. Instead, they used the oxen, and the oxen is considered an oihel even if it's moving. And the reason for that is that the oxen would be it calls it an oihel, even though it's an ox, it's called an oihel, and that causes it to be considered an oihel even though it moves. In other words, because the Torah gives it the term oil, it says teseichecheni. It uses the word oil when it talks about the body. Therefore, it's considered an oil even so. So that would be an explanation of why the moving ox would be considered an oil. And so it's possible that opinion that holds about the moving oil is not an oil, he holds that here they would use specifically an ox. The other opinion that holds they use doors might hold that a moving oil is an oil, and it's not a problem. That's the...
Would that affect a sukkahmobile?
That's a good question. The question would be, When the sukkah is parked, it's no problem. Well, the question would be if the sukkah is driving, would that be a kosher sukkah? That's an interesting question because there are sukkahs on boats, and those are moving, and yet it is considered a kosher sukkah. So I guess the answer to that is that if the floor moves with the sukkah, then it's not a problem because you see, an ox would be a problem. No, the ox, because the tent, well, let's think for a second. If you're in a ship, so the bottom of the ship is moving with the tent. So the tent is not going somewhere where the floor is not going with it. So seemingly that would make, I think that would be the reason why it would be okay, because you have the floor. Now, if you have an oihel that's moving, but the floor is staying in one place, then you would have a problem that you would say that that's not an oihel. So what would such a scenario be? The scenario would be, let's say you're carrying a sukkah. If you're walking around holding, somehow you're strong and holding, very strong and holding a sukkah while you're walking. So then that would be a problem, because then you have an oihel that's moving. Maybe it's not considered an oihel. Maybe it's not called a sukkah. That's an interesting question. So would you be allowed to be eating while you're walking, holding the sukkah? But the typical sukkah has a floor with it. So the floor with it would be, would that be considered? Maybe that wouldn't be considered traveling. I have to think about it. You hear my answer that I'm giving you, David? I'm not sure if it's correct.
Yeah.
I'm just, I'm sharing with you my thought that's offhand. Now, the other question would be is, does the law of sukkah have this exact same law of oihel? You know, does that would that possibly ruin it to be called a sukkah? As if you wouldn't call it an oihel. Now, for example, is a sukkah really full? Does it fit all the rules of oihel? For example, the schach. Let's say a bamboo schach. Bamboo schach is just those bamboo poles. They're not a tefach thick. So what comes out is that when you use those poles on top of your sukkah as schach, maybe your sukkah is not really called an oihel, because it doesn't have, you have empty space in between. So if you want to say Lavud makes it into an oihel, maybe, I'm not sure if does Lavud make it into an oihel to be called an oihel?
For what purpose? When you say call it an oihel, for what purpose?
I'm wondering if it needs to be considered an oihel, and then if it's moving, would it not be called a sukkah? Would a moving sukkah be kosher? It's based on this whole discussion. If it's not an oihel, if it's moving,
You can have a moving oihel.
No, that's not the
if
question.
the discussion we saw that there's opinions that say an oihel zaruk is not an oihel. So if that's true, would that be a problem for a sukkah? If the sukkah is moving, this is David's question. It's a good question.
Rabbi,
But I'm wondering if maybe the sukkah doesn't have all the rules of oihel, and therefore, even if it's moving, it might be kosher. I'm gonna have to look into it, David. Okay, yes, Moshe.
okay. When I was in New York,
Yeah.
I saw sukkahs on bicycles, and they were driving with the sukkahs.
Yeah, but the question is, while the guy's driving, would you be allowed to be sitting in that sukkah? When he stops, no problem. I don't advise it. I don't know how bumpy it is and who knows what. But if you were doing it, would you fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah? But I did bring a proof. There's sukkahs on top of boats. I have to look up in Shulchan Aruch what it says about it. But sukkahs are on top of boats. Why is that? It must be permissible. I think there's even a Mishnah about it. It talks about sukkah on top of boats. We'll have to get to it. Of course, we're on the first half of the tractate. But
could one say that since your sukkah has to be such that the shade is more than the sunshine, would automatically mean that the roof itself isn't like an ohel, because an ohel is probably a solid type roof, and because it's not, then it wouldn't fall into the category of being
an ohel. So I was just mentioning that, not based on the shade versus the sun, based on what's customary to use. Like, for example, you definitely could be an ohel, because if you would use thick poles that were tefach thick, then it would be an ohel. But let's say you didn't have tefach thick poles, which is the norm. You have bamboo poles that are much less than a tefach. So then it seems like maybe it wouldn't be an ohel, except the fact that it is lavud. Maybe that would be considered an ohel anyway.
But aren't you supposed to have a little bit of sun pass through the roofing in a sukkah?
Yeah, but that's not going to ruin it from being an ohel. Just the fact that there's some, if you have the law of an ohel, so an ohel could have shade coming through after every beam. You have after every little area, you have some sun that's coming through. Not that not that it needs to have sun. It has to be able to have rain come through. And a sukkah that's
yeah, but I know sometimes will not allow rain to come through.
Right, but it doesn't have to be that way. And you could have ohels, it could be considered an ohel every little area. This is a little ohel, and then space, and an ohel. Anyway, I have to look up again the rules of I think the best place to look it up would be regarding the sukkah that's on a boat, which we'll probably come to a little later in the tractate. Okay, so anyway, let's get back over here. Let's try to cover some ground. Rabbi Yehuda held that they would sit on top of these oxen, and the children would sit on top of them, and the Gemara mentions that what was wrong with the door that Rabbi Yehuda didn't want, but he specifically wanted them to be on the oxen and not on the door. And the assumption of the Gemara initially was that the fact that it's not the common thing to have a door as an ohel, so it shouldn't be a kosher ohel. And if so, maybe the oxen wouldn't be a kosher ohel either. And the conclusion of the Gemara was, we have an opinion, we have Abaye and Rava. Abaye says, no, you could use a door. Rabbi Yehuda didn't have a problem. It's just you don't have to use a door. Rava said, no, you can't use a door because of a different problem. The problem with the door was that the child might bend over the side of the door because he'll feel too comfortable and too safe, too sturdy, feel too steady. He'll feel and he'll be he'll be curious to look over, and then he might become tamei. And we don't want that to happen. Better if he is sitting on top of an ox, and he'll be more nervous. He'll want to hold on. He'll want to stay put and not move around. And then we turned the page, and we had a brisa as well that said this reason that Rava had mentioned. The brisa says Rabbi Yehuda's opinion that they didn't use doors, and explains that same reason that Rava had said. We're afraid he's going to bend and stick either his head over or one of his limbs, and he'll become tamei. And better if he should just sit on top of the ox, and that will be a block. That will be chatzitza from the tumah, chaitzitz b'fnei hatumah. It'll block the impurity. If there is any impurity below, it'll block it. And now comes the question of the Gemara. We're on page 21b, and we are 8 lines from the top of the page. The Gemara says, "V'harei mita." Behold, you have a bed, the yeshba kama egroifim. And this is taking us back to our Mishnah. A bed is a wide board, and there's space under it to the ground. The bed has a substantial amount of space, many fists of space between the bed, meaning the bottom of the mattress, or the board that's below the mattress, and the floor. And Mita has many agroifim. Utanan, and we learned in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda that we were accustomed to sleep under the bed in front of the elders. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, the bed was not considered an oihel, or being in a separate entity than the sukkah. Instead, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that was considered that we were in the sukkah and it wasn't a problem. But isn't that an oil? And what are you going to tell me that, well, Rabbi Yehuda says the oil that's not made for that intent to be an oil, then it's not, then it's not an oil, and therefore you could sleep under the bed. That sounds good, except that we already learned that if it has many agroifim, if it has the size of a mole egroif, the size of a fist, which we said was like the size of a head of a person, if it has that amount of space under it, then it doesn't need to be made with the intention to be an oil. Even if it's not made with that intention, it's still considered an oil, a tent. And now where you're actually sleeping is not in the sukkah, but you're actually in a separate entity, a separate structure called a tent, an oil inside the oil. That's where you're sleeping, and we don't consider it that you're sleeping inside the sukkah. So the Gemara says, "Shani mita hoyel ulagaba asuya." So the Gemara says, well, the bed was made to sleep on top of it, not to sleep under it. So even though the fact is that it was it has space, mole egroif, it has the size of with the empty space below the bed, and you could say, well, it has we don't care that you did not intend to make this a tent. The fact is it's big enough and it's considered a tent. So the Gemara's answer is, well, that would apply if you didn't intend to specifically sleep on top of it. But when you specifically intend to sleep on top of it, there you are, it's not considered a tent below it. In other words, the specific, if you just have something automatic that happens to be made there, you could say, well, I didn't intend to make it as a tent, but it actually serves as a tent because it has the size of a mole egroif. It has the size of, but here I intended specifically, the reason it's there is not because I might use it under it or I didn't have anything intent. I intended specifically to go on top of it. And it's not meant as a tent. Not meant as a tent. So then we're not going to say that it's going to be considered a tent. And therefore, Yehuda allows you to sleep under it. But the Gemara says, but that's not satisfactory. That's not a good answer. Because the Gemara says, Shvarim Nami, Ligabon Asuyim. What is the purpose of a shar, or the back of an ox? It's not meant to be a tent. It's meant to be something to ride on. So there also, you could say that even though it's large, but it's not going to be a tent for things under it, and ultimately block the impurity from going upward. Ki asa Ravin Amar Rabbi Elazar. So when Ravin came, he said in the name of Rabbi Elazar, Shani Shvarim Hoyel Maginin al Haroyim. So Shvarim Nami is Lagaba. So he says Shvarim are different, oxen are different. The oxen are different because they are used as tents because they actually shade the royim, the shepherds, when it's bechama in the winter, in the summer, mipnei hachama, because of the sun. So they shade. In other words, the shepherds, they would actually sit under the oxen. Don't suggest anyone try this, because the oxen could just crouch down. It's a lot of weight on top of you. But the shepherds, I guess they knew their oxen, and they would do this. They would actually, in the summer, they would get hot. They would actually shade themselves under the oxen, just sit there and lie there. V'geshamim, in the winter season, with the rainy season, with Bnei Hageshamim, they would sit there, protect themselves from the rain. So the shar, the ox, is actually a tent, and that's what it's meant for. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda would say to sleep under the bed. That's he's going to say that's not a problem. I could sleep under the bed. I'm in the sukkah. Why? Because that's not a real tent. Because the bed is meant to be on top of it, not to sleep under it. But an ox, that will block tumah, and it is considered a tent. An ox, a bed isn't. Well, an ox is, because they actually use it as a tent. And so he says, the Gemara says, "Ihachi mitanami." If so, the beds also they protect the shoes and the sandals that are under the bed. People, and Rashi brings that the Talmud Chachamim, they would put their shoes and sandals under the bed. You can't put food there, but you could put your shoes and your shoes there. So it's meant to be a tent. So the Gemara is not satisfied with this answer, and the Gemara is bothered with the fact that Rabbi Yehuda allows himself. He slept under the bed, and he says we used to all sleep under the beds, and it's not considered a tent. What do you mean? Why is it not considered a tent? It's the size of a malei egroif, and more. It's more than the size of a egroif, many egroifim. So Ela Amar Rava. So therefore, Rava answers. The answer that Rava gives is Shani Shvarim Hayel Basuyin Lahagan Al B'nei Ma'ayim Shalom, that the oxen are actually used to protect their stomachs. The oxen, their back is considered like a tent because it protects their stomach, the B'nei Ma'ayim. Shenemar, as it says, Aru Barshar Talbisheni, the skin and the flesh you will clothe me. And you will protect me with your bones, and your sinews, you will be schach over me. And what this means is that the body of an animal person would be considered like a tent, and it would block, it would be able to be considered a tent, even though, of course, the shar is not necessarily made for that, or doesn't seem to be made for that. The pasuk tells us that it's considered a schach, it's considered an oil. And then the Gemara says, so that's one answer, that a shar is considered that it's meant to be a tent on that the shar is meant to be a tent, and therefore a shar will block tumah. Nevertheless, a bed will not so the bed will not block a bed will not be a tent, because it's really meant to be used for on top of it. The main use is really for on top of it, and therefore you would be allowed, according to Rabbi Yehuda, to sleep under a bed. And then the final answer, if you want, you could say another answer, that Rabbi Yehuda l'taimei damar sika sukkah diras keva beinan b'havale mita diras arai. So Rabbi Yehuda holds that the sukkah is supposed to be permanent. So if that's the case, then the bed, relative to the sukkah, is very temporary. It's a dwelling of temporary sukkah, oil keva, and the sukkah being a more permanent dwelling. Osi oil arai and vato oil keva. Going to stop here. The oil arai doesn't this tent does not ruin the permanent tent of the sukkah. And you can't say that I'm dwelling in a tent because I'm under a bed, because the bed is so temporary that it's not even considered a tent relative to the sukkah, which is a sukkah is a diras keva. According to Rabbi Yehuda, of course, this is following, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda would hold that the oyhel, the bed, is not a problem to sleep under it because it's such a temporary thing, and relative to the sukkah, because he holds the sukkah has to be permanent. So for him, the bed is very temporary. We're going to stop here. Sei gesund, everyone.
Rabbi,
Thank you, Rabbi.
thank you, Rabbi. If you look at the Tosfos column here on this page, it has more discussion like you want to look up about a boat.
Okay. Shkoyach.
Rabbi, why did they use the word egrof instead of tefach if we were talking about an egrof being a fist?
So the thing is, it's much bigger than a regular tefach, and it actually is the egrof of in other words, that's what the Gemara is differentiating from. It's specifically not a tefach. Yeah, if it was a tefach, that would be a problem. We're specifically saying that tefach law would mean you could be a tent if you have intention to make it a tent. The egroif is different. Even if you don't have intention to make it a tent, it's considered a tent because it's so big, it's the size of an egroif. And that egroif is obviously a different size